Okay, great. So we're live. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another one of ChildLink's. Well, what is usually a live session, but we've been having some connectivity issues today, so you'll most likely be seeing this recording a bit later. But today's session is really focused on sexual health and reproductive rights, particularly when it comes to young boys, and this is often not something that is discussed. So I'm really happy to have with us here today Yvonne Barrow and Jairo Rodriguez. So Yvonne and Jairo, for those who might not know you, could you please introduce yourself? Okay, so Jairo seems to be you alone because Yvonne.
Hi, well, yes, for the past 7 years, I've been working on human rights and social development program coordination, specifically looking at sexual and reproductive health and rights. Just work with various stakeholders with community lobbying, political lobbying, community advocacy, stakeholder engagements. And I'm very excited to have this discussion with everyone here. It's been so long I've had, one of these talks, so I'm excited.
Awesome. It's great to have you here. Yvonne, mind introducing yourself as well? There might be a bit of delay on Yvonne's end. She did mention that she is in the interior and she might face some challenges. But Yvonne, if you can hear me, please state. I think you're stuck actually. Okay. All right. So we will move on and Yvonne can join in hopefully very soon. But yeah, today the conversation will be focused particularly on SRHR in the context of boys. Generally, it's not something that is discussed within Guyanese society. People don't like to talk about it. So we'll really be exploring some of the reasons behind this, some of the things that are really necessary when it comes to SRHR, and just some things to generally consider whether you're a parent, a community leader, a teacher, whatever it is, because these are important conversations to have with children. So, Jairo, so you mentioned you've been doing this work for several years now. So, as an SRHR advocate who has worked with a lot of youths, who's working communities, can you say what are some of the challenges you might have experienced when it comes to facilitating sessions with young boys, particularly on SRHR?
It's something that happens practically in every village, every town you go to in Ghana, especially when you want to go to school. Sometimes you get called over by the head teacher or the group leader if you're going to go into like a church group, and they would grill you, so to speak, interrogate you on what the topic is about. Because as soon as they hear anything about sexual and reproductive health and rights, the barriers go up. Do not discuss anything to do with LGBT rights. Do not
Mm-hmm.
discuss anything to do with condoms and sex. And the excuse always is it's not appropriate for this age group or these children. And even if you were to cater, because as community advocates, we do cater our delivery to the group and to the context and situations that we'd want to, that's pivotal for the community. But you always have these voices of persons who, even if they've invited you to do these sessions, they always have the intent of what they want you to deliver. That is such a barrier. It's such, what we can and cannot say. And I've often broken these rules, I'll be quite honest, like, because we need to create such a space where we can have frank discussions with children, especially boys. They're curious, they have all these misconceptions because of media and society. And it's just that we all know this. Guyanese society, we do not like to talk about sex and sexuality. It's so uncomfortable, it's so taboo. But why do we make it uncomfortable? Why can't we make it such a conversation where it could be about our health, about our rights, about living together? Because essentially that's what it is.
Yeah, I totally get that. It is something that I've heard a lot when it comes to talking about SRHR for children generally. Persons would say that children are too young, they shouldn't know certain things, but you're really equipping them with the knowledge that is important to their development and their health and their growth. So I never quite could wrap my mind around that. So Yvonne, I see you're back with us. Oh, Jerry, you were going to make a point before I pivot to Yvonne.
Um, well, I would like Yvonne, please jump in anytime. It's just I'm thinking, what exactly is too young? What
Yeah.
exactly is too young when we have
Young in there,
so
I
many?
mean toddlers. They mean on the day. Can you guys
Mhm.
hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear
We
you.
can hear you now.
Okay. Jairo, sorry to interrupt. I did miss the question, but just when I heard you saying what means too young, and because I work with women that are parents and young people, too young means one digit. Too young means two digits. Too young means basically once you're not an adult, sex is not your business. It does not need to be a conversation. So in anything once you're not about 18 or 20, it's too young because I've actually asked persons what too youngs mean. So you should not be telling a toddler that this is the vagina because apparently it's a really difficult word for some people to say in public. Right? So we prefer to say KK or we could say some other term. You should not be telling a boy, well, do not experiment with your penis because that is ungodly or you may injure yourself. So some of the barriers we make, some of the barriers that are kind of affecting our growth, the personal growth of our boys within community, it has to do a lot with tradition, culture, and religion. And those are things that we have carved and are things that we can change. So too young is really toddlers moving on to adults. Too young is anyone that's a child.
Yeah.
If I may say, I mean, that's exactly it, which again, the question, why is that too young? Because when you introduce terms like KK, I remember this a situation, this was described by a teacher actually in her school that because we don't use the right terms, uh, girl was coming, she went to school and she was just saying how her uncle is playing with Teddy, her uncle is playing with Teddy, and the teacher would just take it, okay, play with Teddy, until teachers would escort their students with nursery students to the washroom and stuff. And then she was explaining again, uncle plays with Teddy. And then the teacher realized that she was referring to her vagina as Teddy. And that was obviously a case where instead of you teach even at that age, the correct terms, the correct names of your organs, biology, and also the appropriateness of touching and who has if you were to
The right
teach
to touch.
body autonomy, you would you would from that very young age have someone understand what abuse is, what's inappropriate for someone to do. You would create spaces of those things. And then you have to go to the whole conversation of why do we think we can just force kids to just hug them? Oh, you must go and hug your uncle. Go. It makes children uncomfortable in many situations.
Because it's polite, it's culturally polite. Sorry to interrupt you, Daryl, but they force you to hug because it's culturally polite. It is the mannerly thing to do. It expected of you of a child to not have an opinion. So you subject and you share, and the right thing to do is that you listen to what your adults or parents say. You do not question it. So I can recall a lot in my work within Region 2 when I did child sexual abuse. When you do not teach a child the correct names of the organs, the reproductive parts, sorry, what actually happens, it actually escalates the abuse because that child, they don't know the name. So they didn't know the abuse was taking place. And I can remember in one community, the word for vagina, sorry, was punya. And this girl, they tell me about the punya and the punyo, and I am totally lost. This is an indigenous community. And I had to ask somebody, I said, where's the punya? Because I think that was the first time I ever heard the vagina being described that way. And then I was told, oh, there's a wee scar. Hey, it's a vagina. I was like, Lord. This was a whole new language. Within the language, I can understand that the culture does have different ways of communicating, but still knowing the correct ways can really educate a child. And just to add to what you said, Jairo, you see what happens now. Religion is really the opiate of the masses. And I've seen a case whereby I've asked a child, a toddler, somebody touches you at your penis, your butt, your vagina, what do you do? And the response was, I pray. I did this exercise with a class. I asked again and they said, okay, they keep touching you and it hurts and it's harder. What do you do? We pray harder. And I asked again, I was like, okay, so now you're bleeding and the person keep touching you. And what do? We go on our knees and we continue to pray. And this lesson is being taught somewhere and reinforced in another place. So when it comes to girls and boys speaking about sex and their reproductive health and reproductive rights, it's going to vary because they got so many external factors and pressures that they have to endure. And then coming up as a toddler, if that space is not created within your environment, at least one space, it really affects the way the child grows, their whole socialization.
And pivoting it to boys particularly, we make boys uncomfortable talking about their bodies and identifying even the topic and conversations around penis. So if a boy is to be abused, who exactly is he going to talk to about this? Are we making it safe and comfortable for him to say that I am being abused? And particularly since the conversation is looking at boys and men, and especially how we want to create such spaces, we really need to stop saying that there is something as too young. There's nothing as too young. It's how the information, who's giving the information, where's the information coming from, tailored to the appropriateness of that person and to look at them as a person rather than an age group. So great that we're having this conversation. Is where do we go from here with too young? I'm glad, Yvonne, that in your work you're asking this question because it's something I, for one, that's going into research. I want to document what exactly is too young. So thank you for raising that.
On the whole point of having these types of discussions with children, what do you think are some key information that parents who are interested in having that conversation with their children, what should they know? What should they consider? What are some of these things?
I believe that one. Oh.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Yvonne.
Okay. All right. Just as a starter, I believe that one of the things parents need to consider is creating that safe space, allowing the child to share anything openly. And for a boy, because he has so much societal pressure on him, if he doesn't have a safe space where he can talk, it's going to be harder for that boy to come and talk when there is something to share about sex. So at least the age of 2 is appropriate to start teaching your child about their reproductive organs, using them by the correct name. So that's one way that a parent can actually reinforce and start a conversation. So then the child should not only hear the word penis the first time he goes to school, or if you leave them unattended with the YouTubers, and many parents are doing now with COVID just to cope, and whatever pops up and whatever they read, it might be the first time they're hearing about it, or not to shush them, allow them, to say it and ask their question, because really and truly, it may just be a question. And if they're coming to you first, just listen. One of the things I always tell parents is just listen to what that child has to say and then respond. And then when you need to respond, try to do so in a very sensitive way. Because if you know, people say, bye, go along your way. You got things to do. Because they got things to do. They got like 3 children. They ain't got time for you coming up to find out something but the penis. Man, the penis is a normal thing. It's nobody, that man, as much as it may feel like, oh, well, mommy say, it's a normal thing. She didn't even hear the question, but it's a normal thing. Just go away. So that put it into the conversation. And you heard me say, mommy, that's because a lot of the time the parenting role in the conversation falls with mothers. We like to think that, yes, we're going to put a boy child with a man and a girl child with a woman, but in many cases, in the absence of a father, and when the woman is the person really there, setting up the space in the environment, a lot of the communication still comes back to the woman. So that is why in research, it shows that one of the things men like most when it comes to female partner is loyalty. Because men of themselves, from what we have seen, they do not have the same support system.
Those are some really great points. Thanks, Yvonne.
Well, initially I had laughed at this question because I always like to ask parents, if you're not willing to provide these conversations and from a rights-based approach, where do you think your kids are going to get the information from? Because they will get the
internet.
Not the best place.
And they will get
and
it from
friends.
the internet. They'll get it from porn. They'll get it from their peers who are going to tell them all sorts of things that are not accurate. And some will, unfortunately, and I don't want to kick the religious body, but some will get it from church, which will give a value-centric approach to sex and sexuality, and not one on health, and not one on human society and a rights-based, evidence-based approach. It will be on values, and that's fine if it's your personal values. But it could also be very unhelpful, and it could even be harmful. So if you're not willing to open that, where do you think your kids, because they will, in this day and age, they will get the information, and it's not from a healthy place. So that's why I laughed at that. I always ask parents that. And the thing is, it also opens that we need to also tweak our methodologies to not only look at children and educating children, but we need to educate communities, because parents too need to know how to talk to kids. Parents too need to know what to talk to kids about. And that goes into my second thing, Yvonne, thank you for raising, but these conversations are gendered. You tell boys something completely different than you tell girls. And I remember many times in schools, you pull girls aside, hush, hush, into a classroom and talk to them about menstrual health and periods, and all of that. And the boys have no idea what is being said, but we have an idea of why they were pulled away in the room. Because obviously your friends, your friends are going to come and tell you, oh, they just talked to us about pads and so. And I say this because I remember working in an organization in Guyana on sexual reproductive rights, and the 20-something-year-old technician had no idea that women have menstrual cycles that are monthly. It was a complete shocker. It was, and I was like, you know what? If you didn't go in a biology class, if you weren't a science student, indeed, how would you have known this? Because when you go online, you're going to look at porn, you're going to look at if size matters, you're going to look at body, but you're not going to look at pregnancy as a male. As a man, you're not going to look at pregnancy, menstrual cycle, all of these things that you wouldn't be introduced to unless you were in a human and social biology class. So although I was perplexed, I understood why he never knew this. And that's the thing about our education system. And that's the thing, if we do not talk to boys about these very things, then they're clueless. Because we also have the taboo of men they don't want to go into shops to buy menstrual hygiene products because they don't even know. Sometimes it frustrates me to think about, but it's very gendered. And then when it comes to the conversations about sex, by the time you're nearly the age of consent, or sometimes 2 years before, because a research in Guyana has shown that the age of sexual debut in Guyana averages around 14 years old, even though the age of consent is 16. So adolescents are having sex much younger than the age of consent. And to think why the gendered conversation is the boys, use protection, you're a man or you're getting close to be a man age, so you can get urges, make sure you're safe. That's what fathers and sometimes even mothers would tell their boys. As for girls, you don't have sex, protect your virtue, be very, don't let any boy touch you. So the question then comes to, who are the boys having sex with? So why is it that gap there when it comes, that gender gap always persists of how we talk to our children about sex and sexuality? It shouldn't even exist. Pull everyone in the room, have frank discussions on it.
Exactly. That's a great point because ChildLink recently completed research on caring for boys, and that was one of their major findings, that when it comes to having conversations on sexual health and sex in general, it's not something that's discussed with boys. And it's primarily, when it is discussed, which is very rarely, it's primarily done with young girls. And of course, as Yvonne mentioned, it's usually framed in a negative manner and stuff like that. There was also another reason that was given in that, particularly in the context of sexual abuse, that was a conversation that would happen a lot with girls too. But when it came to young boys, it was just not something that happened because parents and caretakers had the belief that boys can't be abused. And you see, like, these gendered ideas concerning sexual health and sexual abuse and all these different things, it can be really very harmful. And that's why it's really important to have those kind of conversations with everyone, regardless of their gender. So when it comes to the impact that these things can actually have on sexual health and the habits of young boys, what do you think are some of the repercussions of not having these conversations?
For starters, one point out repercussion that I see over and over is men being uninformed of how they can play a role to be a better father. So I'm going to pick it up from where Jairo left off when he mentioned lack of sex education. So, in future what happens, there is a man that present now in the lives of children, prenatal or pregnancy, because he's totally unaware. And when we talk about sex, men are aware of sex, but they're aware of it from a different angle. They see sex more of aggression, some sort of dominance, and is exerted over and over within their relationships. So what we see displayed within a man is what was cultivated from childhood, because he was not given that information. He was not told anything about abuse, that men can actually be abused too. So when the abuse actually occurs, he doesn't even know it's abuse. It might just be another thing. And then because there's no space now for the man to share, he's overwhelmed. So how do men cope when they're stressed and overwhelmed, when they have all of these expectations and perceptions of society weighing on them? What do? I'm assuming they go to the bars and drink it off. I'm assuming they just sleep it off, or they may just walk away. They may be no conversation with a partner or with children. And in the presence of children, that creates a rippling effect that we see. So just to start it off, there's more. Let me hear what Jerry is going to add.
I did mention earlier the age of sexual debut being at 14, which means that exposure to sex came before the sexual act at 14, for one. And it's something we don't think about. If the age of sexual abuse 14, then when exactly were young boys in particular exposed to sex? And really, we've all been to high school and we all have been to primary school, and we know these conversations start as early as primary 3.
Yeah.
But we know it's so uncomfortable. We can't talk when the big people in the room. So we talk about it when we just hang around gaffing, and some very mature conversations happen at these age. And to think about that, if you don't talk to boys and you don't talk to girls about sex, you obviously where the information is come from is wrong. And that puts them at risk for injury when they do have sex at such an early age, because they're going to want to try everything they see online. They're going to want to try these positions and they're going to want to do all these things. It puts them at physical injury, and also to think about the mental impact of what goes on in such an environment. Because how are they introduced to sex in these ways at such an early age, you know?
Yeah.
And then you have the issues, particularly with boys and body image. You see, people like to think sexual education, sexuality education is just the penis and vagina going into each other, the penis and the anus, and sexuality and all these. It's not that. It's about your body, it's about ownership, it's about knowing who you are physically and mentally. And to think about that when we don't have these kind of topics, boys perceive themselves in such a negative light physically that they must have these body images that they see in magazines and in the movies, and that their penis must be quite large, and they must perform well and they must last long. Because where else are they going to get such information where you can actually have sit down and talk that your body is quite fine, whatever, when you're ready to have sex, it doesn't have to be all the concepts that you have in your mind. It's something that's naturally going to happen, that you're going to enjoy rhythms and feelings and all of that. So the health repercussions as well, this mentally is just the stress that comes with it, the anxiety that you must be the best lover that you can be. And then looking at your body, you feel such shame about it. Some people don't even want to take off their clothes. And I remember having conversations with men about the lights on versus the lights off kind of thing. And then looking at it from self-esteem. So we have to look at it from this very, very triangular looking of social determinants of how we impact with health and relations and societies. But then when you reach in the adulthood, it becomes so detrimental when it concerns violence and the inequalities of how we treat women and girls and how we treat people that we would view to be okay less. And then a lot of people with those insecurities would just treat people so terrible just to make themselves feel good. So these conversations, all those issues I pointed out, these very conversations with boys will be such a solid solution to at least addressing them and them having some introspection where we could actually see social changes.
Yeah. Thanks for that,
In
Gerald.
addition to that, Gyro, what also takes place is that consent is misunderstood when there's a lack of conversation. So, people say no, and no means, oh, she's just joking. She really want me pick up and rough shop because this is what this guy do. This is what we get in the muscles for to show that we're strong. So now they force himself to exert it. So consent is really misunderstood amongst men. And I can recall doing some work with some young boys, and street catcalling. So they were souping these girls on the street, and they said, why are you doing that? And they said, because women like it. I said, did she tell you she like it? I see the girl even look back one time. He said the girl smiling inside. He said she smiled and said, I said the girl did not, like I was watching him, the girl, I was like, don't do it. Don't do it because it was like, no, look, the next one will pass. And he gonna do it for proof point that the girl really likes it. So he did this catcalling, the soup song, and one girl did look back. So that was a justification now to say that, okay, well, she liked the catcalling, but the young lady only look back to give you abusing. And then he justified that by saying, she really like it. It's just joking. And I was like, I could have swear her 2 times the lady cussed you out. she didn't like it. So the perception and just to say the perception and consent, the lines, I don't know if they're blurred somewhere with our boys and with our men, that if they try to pull and talk, deep down it mean like she still wants you or something of the sort. Another influence that we missed is music. You see, that Miss Hope, that the artist Miss Hope, the researcher, and if you do masculinity studies, she writes a lot about the influence of dancehall culture. And it speaks to the big black penis. It's right there, pretty evident in our readings. And as you mentioned, the size, and people trying to read up which size matters. I can recall being told stories by colleagues that they take him injections and pill right here in Guyana to increase penis size because it could show that he's a real man. And, all of this effort at something you can't even afford firstly, and then just trying to exhort it, no, with size. So, and that he said came from the fact of dancehall music that can maintain his worth. And that's just one example. So we have the influence of music playing another role in the lives of our boys. So when we listen as adults, you and I, we can understand for sure, like what they're saying, like when I hear some songs, all right, this thing is missing no foreplay, and people gonna feel they're gonna hop on, it goes like that, and they can just ride forever. And they skip the entire segment, realizing that it needs to be a arousal, someone needs to be mentally prepared. And boys still try to do that. They try to do exactly what the song says, and then to gossip or boast about it because they want to feel proud and they want to feel good. So we gotta remember those influences still exist. And when we play certain lewd music in the presence of a 5-year-old, sometimes they'll be rapping harder than me in the bus. I can tell you that. And they can sing it word for word. And them, they don't know the repercussions of it, but because they're exposed to it, they try to act it out. And that's where abuse takes place. That when two children actually engage in some sort of sexual activity, they learned it somewhere or they were taught it. Go ahead, Jerry.
So to think about it, exactly what you say, children are too young for us to expose to sex, right? That's what society says. But we're playing the music for them in the buses. We gyrating in front of them, you know how Caribbean people is dance. And we doing all of that in front of them. And in some cases, we say, come. And I've seen many cases where we do encourage children to dance with each other that. And then when they dance and they want, we're like, yes! So children are too young for sex, but we expose children to sex at a very young age.
Correct.
And that's what I was saying. Who is getting that information? Where's the information coming from when we talk about sex? So we can't just tell parents to talk about sex and they're going to say sex is bad. No, it's what information is being provided. And that I find it interesting with your story. Imagine a woman is talking to this man, don't do it. We women don't like that. And the man is still saying, okay, yeah, women like that. It's completely ridiculous. And that point of consent is very important because we even see it in schools. Many times when you go into classrooms, girls would tell you boys feel they have a right to go to their friends and just touch their breasts or pat them on the behind. And in one case, it was told that the student, the young girl, she did go to her teacher because the teacher saw, and she was looking at the teacher, and the teacher's like, well, why are you dressed like that? Why is your skirt so short? So the conversations often pivot away from the actions of boys and men and go to what girls do or do not do. And I always ask this question, where do women really win when it comes to these topics and conversations? Because we always find a way to blame them. And that's why many times, indeed, if you were to just sit boys down and you explain to them the do's and don'ts, they will find a way to justify it because of society. Society has taught them that their actions are okay. Don't catcall, but women like that. Do not touch girls, but she dressed like that. And anytime you see in the papers about sexual assault or even rape, the conversation goes to, how was she dressed? Where was she? I hate this line, but she was looking for it. And without these very pivotal topics in sexuality education and conversations, particularly for boys and men, we will continue to be in that very disastrous loop. And something in us, in the Guyanese society, has broken some time ago. And it's like we've accepted it. We can't even think of a way of moving past where we are as a people. Anytime someone comes with an idea to say, well, let's try this, it's no, we can't do this because XYZ. But do you not look at the way we are as a society? There's something obviously not okay. We're quick to get angry. We're very violent. We look at violence as just a part of life. And it's trauma. We're traumatized. So this
I'm glad
conversation,
you mentioned traumatized, Cheryl, because what I really want to summarize everything you said is men are victims just as much as women. I strongly believe that. I strongly believe that a lot of touching comes from experimental because they don't know and they just want to know what they can do with a penis. I strongly believe that they know two things growing at the front of a woman, but the hair is bobby, but they know bobby just look like, and nobody never tell them it's not okay to touch someone without your consent. So they go ahead and touch either way. And then if it's enforced that you gotta be macho, the expectations are high. So moving from boy into manhood, the expectation has really made men a victim of the cultures and the different backgrounds that our men and boys come from. Because for everything that was summed up, and with the amount of services we have available, we really have a limited space to include men and boys. We haven't created it as yet in Guyana. We only have a male condom. What other form of contraception, besides the vasectomy we have available for men? It's limited, and that's just the truth. Men don't go to prenatal clinic. They're not involved in it. However, if they do go, it actually creates a space for the nurses to have conversation now about what role the man can play in the child life to support breastfeeding. But of course, why you gotta go to the clinic? You fetch the baby, all they're gonna do is wait for 2 hours and talk and take blood pressure. Then important, clearly not important. So we role is to provide, lead, and protect. So you don't go make the hustle and you make sure the money is provided. You don't get sex at your demand or on par. Because I did some research recently, interviewed some men, and these were feedback they were giving me in rural community. When they want sex, this was the most important to them. And we just gotta lead and guide. That's the expectations of us as men. And this was what was taught to them. The whole aspect of SRHR, it is this big. You understand? This is almost big. This is a struggle we have. And sex is taught to boys, but it's not the way it should be. But rights are not taught, and reproduction is not taught. All we know the penis is good for make baby, right? We can get no other function. Is you place, roll. Because of course women can't make children without you and your seed. So it is taught, but it's the aspect of it that is taught. It creates a different connotation. So when the man come up now and he start beat and he displays a different way, or he's not concerned about no breastfeeding, or he teases, and all these behaviors that we think are toxic for men. Where did it come from? And then who enforced it? Because some spaces, and I can tell you this, that some women do expect some of these things from men. That is just the reality. Some women do expect sex to be rough. I can recall, and I do a lot of group work, so that's why I always got examples to give. We were at a session, and we had about 25 girls, and we asked them, if you want sex rough or smooth, how much time you want it rough, how much time you want it smooth? And most of the women there said they wanted rough at least 8 times. The smooth love making thing, they said like 2 times, So now, even if the man is aggressive, he got to come with a might forever. This is a way to be shown off. And if you got to drink and get some build or some sort of help, if it's a bomb, a Guinness, a Macus, or however you want to mix it to display, she expecting it. And this is 8 or 10 times. No woman said they wanted of making smooth at least 9 times, 8 times. That's sweet and nice to Valentine's and maybe my birthday. But on a regular, that's not how they said they want it. So we shape it and we accept it, and then they'll be like, hey, but he didn't listen and he didn't care. We too, as women or the partner and the mothers that help to shape these men, we have a role to play as to what we accept and what we teach them. So they're victims just as much as women.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Yvonne. And you raised some really great points. One of the things that also stood out for me was the fact that, boys are as much as victims of sexual assault and all these different things as girls. And that's one of the things that was really highlighted in the recent ChildLink research, where it was found that, a lot of it just comes down to cultural stigma and stereotypes that prevents reporting and the belief that boys aren't abused. So that definitely was one of the major things for me. But yeah, today was great. We're almost up, but if you have any last thoughts, anything you want to share that I might not have asked you, please feel free to do so now.
I
Daryl.
want to point out that children are a lot smarter than we think and that we give credit to. And they're very inquisitive. They don't want me to be talked to or treated like if they're just a nuisance or if they're just, something you don't have to take their value or their interest in. But that's not true, because if you were to raise a child like that, where their confidence, their creativity, there's a whole conversation now about, not even a conversation, it's not a conversation. Break the bias which the Ministry of Education for one day allowed girls particularly to wear their hair how they want. And I've seen pictures with boys also doing it, because boys are also, particularly Afro-Guyanese boys, are at a negative. I had to get my hair cut before I go to primary school, and now look, I'm bald. I'm not exactly blaming that, but as a toddler, I had plaits, and my mom explained and I can't imagine myself having plaits, because as long as I've known myself, I had to bald my head to go into school. And when it concerns identity and expressing yourselves, we're not allowing children, we're not allowing boys to be themselves. We're not. We're allowing boys to be what they see in the media, because we think that's the prowess, that's the gallus, that's social acceptance. Walk the way like this, talk the way like this, even be violent, be rough. And while Yvonne was talking, I was thinking, no one wants John Legend. Everybody wants to go to Movado. Everyone wants Vibe Cartel. And then in the media, how we look at it, it's always Spice. I like Spice's music, but you're not going to see me doing Spice's moves, because I frankly don't have the body size, the stamina. I don't flex that way. But that's what's imprinted in our minds. That's what we view as the ideal goal. So can anyone talk to me to say that, particularly when I was in school, is being this skinny Black person okay? I've never heard anyone ever have a conversation with me about that. So in my mind, it wasn't. I wanted to be what the media had. I wanted to be buff. I wanted to be lighter than I was, fair skinned. I wanted to, I didn't want this way of talking with my hands, because I was told boys don't talk with their hands. I didn't want to talk with the tone I had, because obviously, the tone wasn't, yeah, I'm not talking to you like that. So no one told me that exactly who I was okay.
Yeah.
And it took years for me as a person to unlearn and relearn and adapt and readapt into who I'm comfortably am now. And that's why particularly my work is so personal to me, because I just want a society where children can express and be themselves. And we are here to support the nurturing of children. We like to say you raise children or you train children. I hate when people say you're training your child. You don't train children, you nurture. You give them the resources and support for them to be. What you can do is guide them, but have a conversation with them about where exactly they want to be guided. Because we like structures in society, and even when you're in school, business or science. But what about expression of arts and creativity? And even the career paths of many of us in this room, where was our career path? Because school didn't exactly nurture us to do advocacy. School didn't exactly nurture us to be outspoken. It nurtured us to raise our hands, speak particularly on a subject, go home, and then come back to school.
Mm-hmm.
So my closing statement,
I wasn't even raising my hand.
really is, Allow children the freedom to express themselves. Don't shut them out of conversations or say they're too young, because if they're asking questions, that should already tell you they're not too young for what they're asking you, because they already know a bit of it. Now, are you going to give them the right information to help protect them and to help them grow? Or are you going to give them information that stunts that, gives them their curiosity is still there, so they're still going to be searching. And where exactly or what, we talked about this earlier, that they're going to, what exactly are they going to find? So that's my closing statement. Thank you.
Jerry, when you were speaking, I was laughing because when you said you were taught to raise your hands, I wasn't even raising my hands at the back there. we were going through school and the process sometimes, but I really want to encourage. I call it say like, yes, you guys are going through. But I really want to encourage parents, family, women that are in relationships with men or intend to. I want you to encourage boys to show love in different ways. You see, when the request is made now to change the way men express themselves, they want he less violent, they want an emotional man, no, they want the man to be emotional. But wasn't he to be emotional before, when he was 10 and 15 and maybe 20? Who taught him then? He wasn't taught that then. What he taught is what he was exposed to, and very little of that had to come with tenderness, because men are not tender. Men are tough. The tears are limited. They're the people that go to funeral and don't break down, because they got to stand strong and firm for the wife and children. You know why? Because their backs are so broad, apparently, that they can carry the weight of the world. But I want to remind our viewers and society that the men and the boys, they're people too. They break too. They bend, and they can crumble just as easy as any other one. Anyone, sorry. And if we take a look at the suicidal rate, it is always men that can go through the suicide. They got the gut to take the pill if they're taking it. They're not bluff it, They're not do a halfway trip water waiting. Because when they're tired with the expectations and the perception and the weight of the world is so heavy on this man, when he done and he did what he had to do, he has given up and he does no longer want to be on this earth. So if we want a man that is going to be somewhat emotionally aware, have this emotional intelligence, we want them. We still want him to be strong, but do we really want him to be, so lovable? Because you want the woman to say you myself? You really, no, they want to. Do you really want the boy to go to school, and for hold his sister hand, because that's a kind thing to do, to escort a woman? No, you want to. You want with the wine there, with the good sex there, with the money there, because that's how things roll in. We get all the dough and we take it home, and then we're going to be like, but we want love. We want love, we do. We nurture that love. We got trained that love. So when you got, or if you got a boy or nephew or some child, when you get him, remind him, tell him, he's like, do you want to hug me? Yes, it's okay to give a hug and a high five. And it's okay to tell someone, they look beautiful if it's not your wife. Once she accepts it, it's okay, to have that conversation. So when you mentioned nurture Jaro, it hit home for me, because when I speak with a lot of men now, what we want them to be is not how they were trained to be. So they're unlearning, relearning, and adapting to everything. And sometimes it's really a lot, but we can be patient with them if we're really genuine and we're trying. So we not say, oh, love today, but just today alone. One time for the year, we want it on a regular. And then somebody else when go to the office going to tell them, pull it together, your mother there, everybody mother is there. You got to cry all week up. You got a mother too, you can't cry for your mother. And I've seen co-workers trying to hold it together because, he's only buying the office couple tears for someone you knew all your life to cry. You got to go to funeral. Not me. And I would not encourage my nephew to do that either. So when we think nurture, encourage ways that are just as tender when they meet 30 and 40 and you want to be a husband, so you can get some of that. Or else we going to forever get this this and all of this, according to Jairo. So just keep that in mind.
Oh my gosh, Yvonne, Jairo, thank you both so much for being here today and for sharing. This was very informative and also very light. So I really appreciate everything that you guys brought here today. Thanks once again for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having us.